settle in. Oh, and welcome to today's time of meditation. My goal is to guide you into this present moment, and then for all of us just to find a way to linger there. And each time we do that, we're just establishing a little bit more of a habit of finding our way into one present moment at a time. And I hope that we're discovering what an incredible thing that is once we find it. So let's settle in wherever you are, either seated or lying down, but keep a little bit of engagement in your body. So find a way to relax, but keep yourself aware as you start to take long, slow breaths in and long, full breaths out. And a long, slow breath in and a long, full breath out. Let's go two more like that. Breathe it in. Release it out. And in. And out. And then just settle in to a rhythm that feels right for you. Finding that incredible balance between the breath in and the length of time to breathe the breath out. And just notice how even though there's still engagement through the chest and the lungs and the ribs, the body begins to rest as you find that balance of breath. And so the last time we were together, I started this idea of emotional clearing, emotional cleansing. We talked for just a few minutes last time about the emotion of anger and the validation of it as an emotion, and how necessary it is to feel it and to recognize what situation is bringing us to that feeling. And so in our time that we have together now, I'm going to take that just one more step and focus on a different emotion, another one that is just as valid, just as important to our well-being that we feel it, but then talk through some steps to truly facilitate how do we cleanse and clear what the effects of some of these emotions have on our well-being. And so I would invite you just to keep the rhythm of breath nice and slow, deep and steady. And the emotion that we're going to focus on for these few minutes that we have is the emotion of frustration. If I were to ask you to count how many times you felt frustration today, I'm sure we could all come up with a list, because there are little things in life, little inconveniences, big disappointments, behaviors, failed expectations. I could go on and on. All these things happen every day in our world, in our personal world. And we tend to feel frustration. Sometimes frustration comes because of a disappointment about something. Sometimes it's due to a need not being met. But often, what happens with our frustration is it lingers. And that's what we're going to visit about tonight. But first and foremost, I want you just to validate for yourself. Just hear my words and believe them. Every emotion is valid. From sadness to sorrow to joy to frustration. They're all valid because they're all telling us something about the emotional layer of who we are. But what we'll discover tonight is that what tends to happen is they linger a little longer than they should, and then it becomes something else. And the valid use of that emotion turns into something that not only is not helpful, but sometimes it can even be destructive. And so I want to take you through this path of emotional clearing, and we're going to practice it with frustration. I can't think of a better emotion to practice these steps with. And each time as we go through this, I want you just to keep validating for yourself. It's okay to feel frustrated. It is okay to experience that in my emotional part of me. And so the first step to emotional clearing or emotional cleansing is to feel it. Just feel it and own it. Take responsibility. I feel frustrated. Now, don't always associate a cause or a because with it. Just own the emotion. We don't want to own the behaviors of other people that might have been surrounding the frustration. We also don't want to blame the behaviors and actions of others for our emotion. No one can make us feel a certain way. Our emotions come from an internal space. And so right here in this moment, the first step is feel it and own it. I felt frustrated today. Maybe for some of you, I felt frustrated an hour ago. Own it. Believe that it's valid to feel it. And then the second step is we have to identify it. And the way we identify it is every time one of these emotions becomes really obvious to us, just pause and think, what are the circumstances surrounding the events that were going on right before I felt this way? So often we jump into the feeling part that we don't even notice the patterns of things that are prompting the feeling to come. Again, not blaming, but we have to know our triggers. And what frustrates me and makes me feel frustrated will not be the same as what frustrates you. And so the second step is just pause. And as you identify and say, I feel frustrated, just think to yourself, what was going on in life right about the time in the circumstance when I felt this emotion beginning to bubble up? Without assigning blame, without pointing fingers, just start to recognize those patterns and habits. Because the only way to form new patterns, new habits, is to recognize our pitfalls, our triggers. It's not about being ashamed of ourselves or disappointed in ourselves. It's just identifying the emotion and recognizing the circumstances around it. So I felt frustrated today. I felt frustrated when I got a phone call that there was a leak running through the window of my yoga studio. So that circumstance was happening and I had no control over the rain or the lack of sealant around the seal. But I recognized that it caused frustration to bubble up inside of me. And so then the third step is witness what it does to your body. And again, we all have different reactions to these emotions. But whenever you pause, and all these pauses are split seconds, it's not a long, drawn out time. You pause and you just check in and say, I feel frustrated. And then you start to scan your body and see, is it settling anywhere physically? Is it in my fist? Are they clenched? Is it in my jaw? Is it tight? Is it in my tone of voice as I speak? Is it physically manifesting itself in the muscles of my face and causing me to look a certain way? Is my frustration settling into my abdominals, causing pain and contraction? And for some of us, is it settling at the level of contraction all over us where we feel like we are just wound up? And you may have an example that's unique to you, but I would encourage each of us, feel the emotion. Identify what was going on right about the time the emotion was triggered. And check in and see, is it beginning to manifest in my body, physically somewhere? You all know your spots. If your spot is usually in your face, check your jaw. Check the tension of clenching your teeth. If you know you struggle internally and you get that feeling in your gut that is just uncomfortable, check in right there the minute you begin to feel frustrated. Because then step 4 says, release it. Remember in the very beginning, I said we got to feel, and we have to feel them all. But we don't attach to them in a way that they linger. And so all of this is happening in a matter of seconds. I feel frustrated. I recognize that I got a phone call about a problem at the studio and I feel frustrated. I check in and I make sure that the person I'm speaking to on the phone doesn't hear my frustration in my voice and that it's not manifesting physically. And then as I realize that it is pouring down rain outside and that window is not anything that I can fix in this moment, I got to release the frustration. And you're all going to have your own examples, your own situations, from traffic as you drive through campus, as someone at the office not meeting your expectations or changing deadlines, to a spouse or a partner or a dear friend who doesn't hold up their end of what they said they would do, and on. You're going to feel frustrated. But we've got to release the emotion once we've given ourselves a chance to feel it. And so now maybe you're thinking, Kelly, that all sounds well and good, and I want to do that, but how do you release it? Well, here in our practice, we're going to use the breath. It is the tool you take with you everywhere you go. My solution for most things that manifest physically is I tell myself to fold it out. I take a breath in, I fold out on the exhale, and I just hang out there until it feels better. But you can't always find your way into a forward fold. But you can always breathe. And so I'd like for each of us, just recall into your mind something today, some circumstance that was going on right about the time you felt frustration. Doesn't have to be big and catastrophic, just one inconvenience. And as you picture that thing, we're going to try to use our breath to release that one out. And if you've got a dozen more frustrating things from the day, maybe you do this later on and you release them all. Or maybe you just release today's frustrations as a whole. So let's go back to that breath and take a long, slow breath in and get resettled together. And a full, deep breath out. A long, slow breath in. And a full, deep breath out. And just continue a couple more while I talk you through what we're going to do. We're going to use the breath. What I'd like for us to do in just a moment is we're going to inhale as full as we possibly can and feel the expansion physically in the ribs, in the heart, and the chest. And then I'd like for us to hold it at the top for just a second. And then release it out. And while we're holding it, instead of thinking about how long are we going to hold this breath, say to yourself, I release the frustration. You can name the thing or not. But before you actually breathe out, in that little moment of hold, which is actually the sweetest spot of the breath between the inhale and the exhale, just say in your mind, I release the frustration. I have felt it. I've validated it. I have witnessed it. And now I'm ready to let it go. We're going to do that for a few rounds. And just see if maybe you can separate from that thing, that circumstance, that emotion, just a little more. So either sit really tall if you're seated, or if you're lying down, just kind of stretch yourself out really long so that your spine feels like the air can just go up and down without any barriers. We won't hold the breath long, just long enough for us to say, I release the frustration. So take a long, slow, deep breath in and pause. Exhale, let it go. Long, slow, deep breath in and pause. Exhale, let it go. A long, slow breath in and pause. And exhale, let it go. One more time, deep breath in. And pause. Exhale, let it go. Just let your breath return to normal. And just kind of notice, how do you feel? And we're going to sit together quietly for this next moment or so and just feel and be. Notice. Witness. Bring your attention back to the space that we're sharing together. Don't lose that connection that you feel within your physical and your physiological self. You know, there's no magic within the breath. It is just a tool that we utilize. But the really beautiful thing is that when you learn the power of that pause before you let it go, that's where you're making your plan. It's sort of like pausing before you respond to someone. You make the plan in your head of how do you want to say it? What do you want it to sound like? The same thing happens with releasing emotions. We breathe it in. We feel the fullness and the expansion. And right before we actively let it go, we say our plan. I release this. I have already felt it. I'm done. And in place of that, now I find liberation. And when the next emotion comes, I will feel it. And if there's a circumstance around it, I will recognize it. I will watch how it manifests within my body. And then, without attaching to that emotion, I'll release it. My hope for you is that you will find a way to release whatever needs to be released. Some of these things are close and a little tender toward our heart. Some of these things are small and inconsequential. But all of them, if we let the emotion linger and we become attached to it, that's when it becomes unhealthy and oftentimes even destructive. Keep feeling, but at the same time, keep releasing. Namaste.